Set. Welcome to soft mystic stories. People still often whisper to each other that Atlantis sank deep beneath the ocean floor, along with all its secrets. But what would happen if I told you that the survivors managed to climb ashore, dry themselves off, and then naturally sat upon the throne to rule all of Europe?
Laughable, right?
But let's look at the year 451 AD. A child is born, and his mother swears on her life that the baby's father is not a mortal man, but a sea monster. A kinner smells heavily of fiction and medieval superstition, doesn't it? But wait, why did this Merovingian lineage possess knowledge 1,000 years ahead of its time in the middle of that dim, dark age? Why were they sickly obsessed with keeping their hair long, as if it were an antenna catching signals from their ancestors? And most suspiciously, why did the church and the subsequent dynasty have to go to such lengths to shave the head of the last king, erasing every record as if trying to hide a stain? Or rather, a non-human origin that mainstream history dares not admit? Could it be that the bloodline of the priest kings from Atlantis never disappeared, but is still silently flowing, lurking right under our noses? Welcome back to Dark History. I am Zorro. Don't be too quick to believe what the textbooks write. Fasten your seatbelts, because today we aren't digging up graves. We are diving to the bottom of the weetest conspiracy theory in history. Let's get started. It is the year 451 A. The world is crumbling. The Roman Empire, that giant aging corpse, is gasping its final breaths. But tonight, we are not talking about Rome. We are on the banks of the Rhine River in the flickering darkness of a Germanic settlement. Imagine it, the smell of burning wood, the smell of blood and fear. Under a sky full of fading stars, a child is born. The midwives, women accustomed to death and birth, are trembling. Why? Because this baby is not like a human. Stretched across the baby's shoulder blade is a crimson birthmark, not a bruise, but a pattern. It looks like waves. Violent waves crashing into a coast that died thousands of years ago. They name him Merovit. But his mother, the delirious woman, her face drained of blood, is uttering mad words. She isn't speaking Old German. She is speaking a language that sounds like rushing water, syllables heavy with memories of cities swallowed by the ocean, 9,000 years before Plato picked up his pen. That is the span of time this child's dark eyes are looking through. The Merovingian dynasty. Sound familiar? Maybe you've heard it vaguely in boring history classes. They were the first kings of France, the barbarians who built an empire on the ashes of Rome. Textbooks say they were skilled warriors, but the whispers, my favorite thing, say otherwise. They say that Merovac and his lineage did not gain power through swords and spears. They had it because of the blood flowing in their veins. A blood not belonging to this continent, a genetic memory of Atlantis. Can you believe it? A crimson thread connecting the crystal towers of a mythical island to the crude wooden halls of Francia during the medieval long night. It sounds crazy, but let's look at the facts. The Merovingians were real. Their tombs are there. Their gold is in museums. But their origins completely a thick fog. They appeared out of nowhere carrying characteristics that no Germanic tribe possessed. The story begins not in France, but in Athens, Greece. The year 360 BC, Plato, the great philosopher, is writing. He isn't writing fantasy novels, my friends. He is recording history. He tells of an island empire located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, modern-day Gibraltar, a civilization so insanely advanced it once ruled both Europe and Africa. And then, boom, one day and one night of misfortune. Earthquakes, floods, and an entire continent sank to the bottom of the sea. Modern scholars smirk. Oh, that's just an allegory for hubris. Fine, let's assume they're right. But what happens if some Atlantans escaped? The rats, leaving the sinking ship carrying gold, knowledge, and most importantly, their genes. Fast forward 800 years, Rome falls. Europe is in chaos. And suddenly, the Merovingian clan appears. They are unlike anyone else. Historical records. Note that this is history, not fairy tales. Describe them as having supernatural abilities. First, the ability to heal with just a touch of the hand. Second, the ability to see the future. Third, the hair. Look closely at this detail. The Merovingian kings never cut their hair. To them, hair was an antenna, a source of divine power. Cut the hair, and they become invalid. Who does that sound like? Samson in the Bible, or the priests of lost ancient civilizations? This is not Germanic culture. The Germans of that time cut their hair short to fit under helmets. But these kings let their long hair fly in the middle of the battlefield. Why? Because they believed they were descendants of gods, more specifically descendants of Poseidon. Let's talk about Merovac's father, or his stepfather. The founding myth of this lineage says Merovac's mother, while swimming, was impregnated by a creature called Echina, a sea monster. Seriously? But let's peel away the layer of medieval superstition. What do you see? A creature from the sea, a bloodline that is not human, a hybridization right at the foundation. Set. Could Kinator be how the people of that time, who had never seen a submarine or a diver, described a survivor from Atlantis with strange equipment? Or simpler yet, is it how they encoded the truth that this royal bloodline came from the ocean? The evidence lies scattered like shipwrecks. Look at the tomb of Child I Merovac's son, found in 1653. 300 bees made of solid gold. Why bees? In ancient Mediterranean cultures like Egypt or Minoan, bees were symbols of immortality, of the soul, of resurrection. Napoleon Bonaparte later became so obsessed with this symbol that he took it as his own royal emblem. What did he know that we don't? The Merovingians practiced inbreeding to preserve purity. They built complex water systems and hydraulic engineering right in the middle of a primitive era, as if they were remembering how their ancestors built the canals in Atlantis. They appeared out of nowhere, held absolute power, and then they were systematically wiped out. Why were the Church and the Carolingian dynasty so afraid of this bloodline that they had to cut their hair, shave their heads, and imprison their last king? Perhaps the secret of Atlantis does not lie at the bottom of the sea. Perhaps it is flowing in someone's veins right now. But to understand why they were destroyed, we must go back to the final days of Atlantis itself, the day the ocean opened its mouth to swallow the gods. Set. Do you hear that? That isn't thunder. That is the sound of a continent shattering. Let's go back to that moment, not through dusty book pages, but through panic. Imagine the final hours of Atlantis, a beautiful morning, merchants bargaining, priests muttering prayers to Poseidon, and then the earth shuddered, not a storm, but a death sentence. Plato described it with the coldness of a coroner. In one day and one night of misfortune, just like that, a civilization possessing oracle metal, people who knew how to control the stars, wiped out in 24 hours. When that wall of water hit, taller than our modern skyscrapers, it didn't care if you were rich or poor, king or slave. The brutal mathematics of geology does not listen to prayers. But, and here is history's giant but, humans are very good at running away. Their most advanced ships likely managed to weigh anchor before the harbors collapsed. The wisest ones, or the most cowardly, depending on how you call it, took what was most precious, knowledge and blood. They scattered across the world like seeds blowing off a burning tree. Fast forward 10,000 years, a period long enough for truth to turn into legend and legend into fairy tales, told to put children to sleep. We are in 5th century Europe. The Roman Empire is dead. The barbarians are tearing apart the rotting corpse, and from that chaos, the survivors re-emerge. Set. Look at Clovis I. He wasn't a normal smashing barbarian. He was a genius, a political old fox. From 481 to 511, Clovis turned a tiny Frankish kingdom into a massive empire, and he did it with the most spectacular trick in history, converting to Christianity. History books say he was persuaded by his wife, and God helped him win battles. Clovis saw the power of the Roman Church. He needed the Pope's support to legitimize his rule. He put on the cloak of a new Constantine, the defender of the faith. But look closely beneath that cloak. They still kept the long hair.
You have to understand this.
At that time, men having long hair was a symbol of divine power, not hippie fashion. Cut the hair and you lose the throne. Why would a Christian king cling to such a bizarre pagan belief, unless the source of their power actually lay there? Like Samson, like the Atlantean priests, they practiced polygamy. Clovis and his descendants took many wives, not out of lust, but to sow the divine blood as widely as possible. They were obsessed with genetics, and most terrifying, the royal touch. They believed they could cure squalor just by touching the sick. A superpower, or an ancient medical technique passed down through family memory. Let's talk about physical evidence, because I know you guys are skeptical.
Zorro, are you spinning a yarn?
Not at all. Look at what they took to the grave. Set. The tomb of Child I Clovis's father. When they dug it up in 1653, what did they find? A crystal ball, the head of a bull, symbol of the god Poseidon/Baal, and of course, hundreds of golden bees. What devout Christian buries themselves with a scrying ball and a bull's head? No one. These are talismans of a different culture, a culture that worships the ocean and prophecy. And one more thing that makes historians scratch their heads, their sudden wisdom. While all of Europe was sinking into illiteracy and the garbage of the Dark Ages, the Merovingians knew about hydraulic engineering. They built complex aqueduct systems for their palaces. They collected books, preserved knowledge. How did a bunch of savages, in the words of the Romans, suddenly know how to build sophisticated water systems? Did they learn it, or were they remembering it? Remembering how their ancestors built the great concentric canals in Atlantis. By the middle of the 6th century, the Merovingian Empire was the strongest power in Western Europe. They had land, they had armies, and they had divine blood. They seemed inviolable, but power always comes with envy, and secrets are the most dangerous things to hold. There were those watching them from the shadows, those who didn't have divine hair but had dark ambition. Those who realized that to rule this new world, they needed to wipe out the remnants of the old world. Do you smell the betrayal? Because it's coming very close now. The mayors of the palace, the servants sharpening knives behind their masters' backs. And the biggest question posed is if the Merovingian bloodline actually contains the DNA of Atlantis, then destroying them isn't just a political coup. It is an ethnic cleansing, an attempt to sever humanity's last link to the gods of the sea. But how do you kill a king whom the subjects believe is immortal? You don't kill him, you humiliate him. You cut off the source of his power. Every great empire dies twice. The first time is the death of the spirit. The second time is the death of the body. Atlantis died due to a natural disaster. But the Merovingian Empire, oh no. Their death was meticulously designed by humans. A slow, painful, and humiliating death.
Welcome back to the crime scene.
By the 7th century, our divine kings began to change. History calls them by a sarcasm-dripping name. Ruas Phenons, the lazy kings. Look at this picture. The king sits on an ox cart, eyes glazed over, hands hanging limp. Real power no longer lies in their hands. It has slid into the hands of those called Mayors of the palace. Sounds like the title of a hotel manager, right? Don't be fooled. These are the CEOs actually running the corporation, while the chairman of the board is busy connecting with the universe. The Merovingian kings still held the title. They still kept the long hair. They still touched to heel, but they had become puppets in a bloody puppet theater. They were under house arrest within their own divinity, while the mayors descended from the family preceding the Carolingians, held the army and the treasury. Why was this line of mayors so dangerous? Because they were pragmatists. They didn't care about Poseidon or Atlantean blood. They cared about steel and land. Let's talk about Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer. In 732, this guy defeated the Muslim army at the Battle of Tours. He saved all of Europe from Islamic domination. Hero, definitely. But in Charles's eyes, the long-haired kings sitting in that palace were just useless parasites, an obstacle that needed clearing. But Charles was wise enough not to make himself king. He knew the people still feared the shadow of the gods. He needed a more legitimate excuse. He needed God. And this is where Charles's son enters the stage. Pepin the Short. Don't laugh at his name. This dwarf had ambitions higher than the peak of Olympus. In 751, Pepin executed a masterclass political move. He didn't coup with swords. He court with a question. He sent a letter to Pope Zacharias in Rome. The content of the letter boiled down to Holy Father, who should be king, the one who bears the hollow title, or the one who actually holds power in his hand. You have to understand the context then. The Pope was being threatened by the Lombard army. He needed an army for protection. Pepin had the army. The Pope's answer was drafted before the question was even asked. A transcontinental handshake. The one holding power should be king. Boom. Just one sentence, and the 300-year legitimacy of the divine bloodline was wiped out. This wasn't politics. This was a power transaction, a contract of cultural assassination signed between the throne and the cross. And now for the ending, the last Merovingian king, Childeric III. Imagine that day. Childeric is dragged before the council of Frankish nobles. No throne for him, only a bare wooden chair. He isn't killed. Killing a divine king would turn him into a martyr. Pepin the Short was far more cruel than that. He wanted to destroy Childic's essence. They pinned him down. Cold scissors touched his scalp. One by one, the sacred locks fell to the floor, hair that had never been cut since birth. hair containing the genetic code of the priest kings, the antenna connecting to the memory of the ocean. Snip, 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 with every cut. They didn't just cut hair, they severed the connection to the past. They castrated his spiritual power. When he stood up, Chilric was no longer a king. He was just a bold, pathetic, and powerless man. Pepin was anointed with holy oil and crowned. The Carolean dynasty began. The era of blood ended. The era of anointing began. From now on, a king is not defined by blood, but granted by the church. Do you see the irony? To bury a legend about Atlantis, they created another legend about the power of God. Child 3 was thrown into a dark monastery. He lived out his remaining days in oblivion in that cold cell. Did he feel anything? When the hair was gone, did the whispers of the ocean fade completely? Or did he still hear the sound of waves crashing on lost shores, reminding him of what humanity had just lost? He died in 754. History records his death as a full stop. But remember what I said at the start of the show. Blood doesn't simply end. It fragments. It hides. Pepin and the church thought they had dammed the flow of Atlantis. They thought the scissors and holy oil had solved the problem. They were wrong. That blood didn't die. It just went underground, flowing like subterranean rivers beneath the foundations of Europe. And sometimes, just sometimes, it rises up again in mysterious historical figures, in secret societies, in legends of the Holy Grail. History is written by the victors. That is the most cliché phrase your history teacher ever taught you. The truth is, history is written by those who hold the pen, but those who hold the blood, they write into DNA. We witnessed the fall of Atlantis. We saw the sacred hair of the Merovingians fall to the monastery floor. But my friends, let's think a little. When an empire collapses, people don't evaporate. When a king is deposed, his sperm doesn't suddenly become deactivated. The blood, it doesn't end. It just goes underground. Like a subterranean river flowing beneath a dry desert, the Merovingians were stripped of their crowns, but they didn't go extinct. They fragmented. They married their daughters into other noble families. They changed their names. They hid in the shadows of the common class or the lower nobility. And the blood of Atlantis, if it truly exists, has silently spread throughout the circulatory system of Europe for the past 1,300 years. The most haunting question tonight isn't where did they go, it's why. Why were the Church and the Carolinians so afraid of them? Why the effort to wipe out the memory of them so brutally? Let me offer a hypothesis that keeps powerful men awake at night. The Church's power relies on the mandate of God. The Pope is the intermediary. But the Merovingians, they claimed power came from blood, from genetics. They didn't need the Pope to anoint them to become kings. They were born kings. If the legend of Atlantis is true, then that blood carries a power more ancient than Rome, more ancient than Jerusalem. It represents a lost world order where humans and gods, or those possessing high technology, walk together. That is an existential threat. You cannot control a man who believes he carries the genes of Poseidon. Therefore, you must turn him into a heretic. You must turn his ancestors into monsters, and you must bury the truth under tons of dogma. We have traveled a long journey from crystal cities, sunk at the bottom of the Atlantic, to the dense forests of Gaul. From the glory of long-haired kings to the humiliation of the barber scissors. You can believe this story or consider it the delirium of paranoid people. But look at modern science. We are starting to understand genetic memory. That trauma, the deep memories of ancestors, can leave a mark on the descendants' genetic code. The ocean remembers Atlantis. The land remembers the Merovingians. And who knows, maybe your own body remembers too. Look at your hand. Have you ever felt an invisible fear before the sea? Or conversely, an intense homesickness when standing before the ocean, even though you were born in the mountains? Have you ever felt an urge, an intuition telling you about things you were never taught? Perhaps, just perhaps, a grain of gold dust from Atlantis, a fractured segment of Merovingian code is drifting within you, waiting to awaken. Look out at the sea. What do you see? A flat surface of water, waves lapping romantically against the sand. Oh no. Don't be that naive. To me, the ocean is a giant cold blanket covering the corpses of civilizations. We often think history is what is written on paper, but the truth often lies at the bottom of the sea. Today, I won't tell you the fairy tale about Atlantis that Disney or Hollywood keeps parroting. Forget the crystal castles. We will talk about something much darker. Blood. Rewind to the time before the catastrophe happened. Poseidon, the god of the sea and earthquakes, surrounded his lover with alternating rings of land and water, a defensive structure, or a prison. Their union bore 10 princes headed by Atlas. History books say Poseidon loved Clio for her earthly beauty. Men, even gods, are just the same, huh? I doubt that. Look closer. Poseidon is called the Earthshaker. Him choosing an island prone to earthquakes to sow his seed was not accidental. It was a gamble. Many theories suggest Poseidon wasn't looking for love. He was conducting an evolutionary experiment, creating a hybrid race carrying divine consciousness in a mortal body. Atlas, the name meaning the bearer, was the first prototype set. He bore on his shoulders not just the sky, but the burden of a cursed bloodline stuck between God and human, between sea and land. In the early days, Atlantis was a paradise of justice, but anything hybrid is usually unstable. As the divine blood diluted over generations, the human part rose up. Ambition, lust, the desire to dominate. The kings of Atlantis began to treat their divine origin as a license to do evil, not a responsibility to serve. And then, boom, the gods were fed up with this failed experiment. They hit the reset button. Atlantis sank. But here is where things get interesting. Do you believe they all died? A civilization capable of flying into space, according to some rumors, didn't know how to build escape ships. What would happen if the surviving Atlantines learned a bitter lesson? That don't be kings of the world anymore. Hide yourselves, become guardians in the shadows. Keep that thought in your head and join me in leapfrogging over millennia to the year 451 AD to a desolate Europe where a phantom is rising from the sea. Merovac, or Merovet. The name sounds like metal clashing. Mainstream history says he was a Frankish chieftain, a lucky barbarian. But the legend about him, oh boy, it reeks of sea salt. Merovac's mother, while swimming, was raped or seduced by a monster. The Echina, a 5-horned sea beast, also known as the Kintora, a mortal woman, a supernatural sea entity, a hybrid child carrying the blood of both worlds. Sound familiar? It's exactly like Poseidon's formula for creating Atlas back in the day. Don't tell me this is a coincidence. The Franks are a Germanic people. Their gods are in the forest. Odin, Thor. They worship oak trees, worship thunder. The ocean to them is a place of death, not the birthplace of kings. For a Frankish king to claim he is the son of a sea monster is as absurd as me claiming I'm the son of an alien. Unless the story of the Kinotaur monster is just a veil, a code. Merovac or the people behind him are trying to tell the world, or more accurately tell those in the know, that hey, we are that lineage. We come from the sea, we are the remnants of Atlantis. And the children of Merovac, the Merovingian dynasty, what did they do to prove it? They didn't behave like normal barbarians. Look at Childrich, I Merovac's son. When they excavated his tomb, they didn't find symbols of wolves or bears or eagles, animals symbolizing muscular strength. They found 300 bees made of gold. Why bees? Bees are not a symbol of the Germanic people, but bees are a sacred symbol in the Mediterranean, in Egypt, and in ancient maritime cultures. Manoan Chalderic was playing a mind game, or was he following an instinct written in his genes? And then came Clovis I, the one who converted to Christianity to please the Pope. A genius political move. But look closely at his private life. He still kept the sacred long hair. He was still polygamous. He still believed he had the ability to heal by touch, a power of the gods. Clovis was like a man walking a tightrope. One hand shaking hands with Jesus, the other hand still gripping Poseidon's trident. He wanted the church's protection, but absolutely refused to give up the core rituals to maintain the magic in his blood. But what is the tragedy of this bloodline? It's that the later it got, the more power corroded them, or perhaps they forgot their mission. The lazy kings Ronants of the 7th century, history calls them lazy, useless. But what if that uselessness was a choice? What if they knew that political power was just ephemeral, and their true task was to protect something lying within their own bodies? They clung to their divine status, to the uncut long hair, like drowning men clinging to the last lifebuoy. They sensed, however vaguely, that cutting their hair was not just losing beauty. It was severing the antenna connecting to their ancestors under the sea. And that leads us to their brutal collapse. When Pep and the Short and the Carolinians appeared, they didn't just want the throne, They wanted to destroy the divinity of the Merovingians. Why did Pepin have to be so cruel? Why cut Child III's hair and lock him in a monastery? Why not simply kill him? Because you cannot kill a divine bloodline with swords. You must destroy its symbol. You must humiliate it. Pepin knew or sensed that he was confronting a power more ancient than Rome, more ancient than Jerusalem. But did that blood truly disappear? Or did it just dive deep once again, waiting for its time? To answer this question, we need evidence. Not legends, but physical evidence. And believe me, what they found in the tombs and in the DNA of dry skeletons will send chills down your spine. 9,600 years BC, a number that makes mainstream archaeology frown, but makes Plato nod in his grave. This is the time the Ice Age ended. Ice melted. Seata rose like a hungry monster, swallowing millions of square kilometers of coastal land. If Atlantis existed, this is exactly when it was wiped out. A bad day to be an island citizen, right? But let's use your logical head for a bit. When your house is on fire, do you sit still and wait to die? No, you run. You grab what is most precious and run. The boldest hypothesis I want to throw in your face today is this. Atlantis died, but the Atlanteans did not. A few escaped. Imagine that context. Europe at that time was just a playground for hunter-gatherer tribes. No writing, no architecture, living in caves and skin tents. And then suddenly, from the open sea appeared strangers. They knew how to farm. They knew how to watch the stars to predict the weather. They knew how to build dams to stop water. To the locals, these refugees were not human. They were gods or demons. But their numbers were too few. Hundreds, maybe a few thousand survivors compared to a wild continent. How do you preserve the legacy of a superior civilization when you are facing the risk of assimilation or extermination? You have to play an extremely dangerous genetic game. You marry locals to survive, but you must keep your bloodline as pure as possible. You create a closed ruling class. You become kings. And that is exactly how the Merovingian dynasty was born. It's not for no reason that the Merovingians were obsessed with bloodline purity to a pathological degree. To them, blood isn't just biology. Blood is data storage. Blood contains the blueprints of the lost civilization. Let's go back to the evidence we left open in the previous part. Scattered fragments of memory. First, the bees. 300 golden bees in children's tomb. Why bees have no standing in Norse or Germanic mythology. Vikings didn't carve bees on shields. But look to the south, ancient Egypt. Bees are the tears of the sun god Ra, a symbol of resurrection. Minoan civilization on Cray. Bees are the symbol of the mother goddess. Child's bees are a brand logo, preserved for 10,000 years. A discreet way to say my ancestors did not come from the black forests of Germany. We came from the golden sunny islands of the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. Second, the Kinotaur legend, a sea monster raping a queen to give birth to the first king. Sounds ridiculous. Straight out of a grim fairy tale, but strip away that mythical cover. The queen is a metaphor, a code. It states that this bloodline was grafted from the sea, that a foreign, non-human or superhuman element intruded into the European gene pool via the sea route. If you were an exiled Atlantan, you wouldn't dare say bluntly, "Hey, I come from the sunken city." No, you would turn it into a legend so future generations would still remember the origin, but outsiders would only see it as a harmless tall tale. And third, strangest of all, the sacred hair. Why would Merovingian kings rather die than cut their hair? The Bible has the story of Samson losing strength when his hair was cut. But Samson was Jewish. These are Frankish kings. The priest kings of Atlantis, according to Plato's description, also maintained distinct physical characteristics. Perhaps long hair wasn't fashion. It was an antenna, a biological part necessary to maintain their psychic abilities or superior intellect. Cutting it off is disconnecting from the network. It is becoming a useless mortal. Look at this map. Look at how they chose where to set up their capital. The Germanic people are forest and mountain people, but the Merovingians, they were obsessed with water. They built palaces along major rivers. They built irrigation systems, canals, and bridges with a technical level that even the Romans had to respect, while around them were tribes still struggling with pitching tents. Where did that knowledge come from? What university taught them complex hydraulic engineering in the 5th century, when all of Europe was submerged in the Dark Ages? The standard answer is they picked it up from the Romans. Zorro's answer: they remembered. That is genetic memory. They didn't learn. They awakened knowledge that had been sleeping in their genes. The surviving Atlanteans carried not just gold and silver, but an entire library of knowledge encoded in their very bodies. mathematics, astronomy, architecture, all waiting to be activated. The Merovingians were not just a dynasty. They were a living time capsule, a desperate effort to preserve the spark of the old civilization in the dark night of human history. They succeeded for 300 years, but secrets cannot be kept forever. And their enemies, those who wanted to wipe out Atlantis once and for all, were sharpening their knives. But wait, I see doubt in your eyes. Zorro, you speak well, but where is the proof? Show me something tangible, not just mythological stories. All right, you want hard proof? You want to see Atlantean technology hiding in 1,500-year-old antiques? The year 1653. Tours, modern-day Belgium. A mason named Adrien Quinquin is digging in the ruins of the ancient church of St. Brie. Adrien is deaf and mute. A perfect irony of fate. The man who cannot speak and cannot hear is the first person to listen to an echo from 1,200 years ago. His shovel hits stone, a sealed cavity, and as daylight floods into it for the first time in over a millennium, history is slapped across the face. It was the tomb of Chilric I, and the things inside, oh boy, they shouldn't have been there. According to the logic of history textbooks, they are OOP arts, out-of-place artifacts. Exhibit 1, the crystal ball. They found it lying right next to the king's body. A sphere made of quartz, perfectly round, polished to absolute transparency. Recall the context. 5th century Europe. Glass and gem crafting technology was at a primitive level. To grind a block of hard quartz into a perfect sphere like this requires knowledge of optics and grinding techniques that Europe did not possess at the time. Why would a barbarian chieftain need a high-end optical device for divination? Or was this a storage device or a lens from a dismantled maritime tool? Whatever it is, it's like finding an iPhone in Tutankhamun's tomb. It doesn't belong to that era. Exhibit 2, the spar sword. On the surface, it's just an old sword. But when modern metallurgists examined it under a microscope, they held their breath. The blade was forged using the pattern welding technique, folding and forging the metal hundreds of times to create super-hard steel layers. Much like the legendary Damascus steel, this process requires a deep understanding of metal chemistry, of temperature, of the crystal structure of steel. The Frankish blacksmiths of that time were thought to only know how to pound crude iron. So, who taught them this technology? Or was this sword a legacy passed down? A weapon from the old era, preserved and handed down through generations as a sacred relic protecting the bloodline. And look at this signet ring. It doesn't just have the king's name and image. Look at the border. Water waves, celestial bodies, stars arranged in non-random positions. Some researchers believe this isn't decoration. These are coordinates, a star map. If you know how to read it, this ring could point the way back to the old home. Or at least, it confirms its owner was a master of navigation, someone who knew how to position themselves in the vast ocean. A redundant skill for a king ruling a landlocked territory, unless his blood yearned to return to the sea. But the evidence doesn't just lie in the tomb. It lies scattered on the ground, hidden in the structures we walk past every day. The Merovingians were obsessed with geometry and water. The Basilica of Saint-Denis, where the kings of France are buried, was built on Mayan foundations. Measurements show it strictly adheres to the golden ratio Fi and align with specific astronomical events. They built aqueduct systems, concentric circular reservoirs. Sound familiar? It echoes the structure of the capital of Atlantis described by Plato. These structures often faced precise geographical directions, serving ritualistic purposes more than practical ones. Why go to the trouble of building complex water systems in places that didn't need them? Unless water was sacred to them, unless they were trying to recreate the model of their lost homeland on strange soil. And finally, let's talk about orichalcum. Plato described Atlantis as wealthy, thanks to a mysterious metal glowing red, like fire. Orichalcum. Chemical analysis of Merovingian copper alloys reveals something strange. They contain zinc and trace elements that create a distinctive reddish gold color. And this ratio is very unusual compared to European bronze of the same period. Did they discover a lost metallurgical formula? Or were they melting down the last ingots brought from Atlantis to cast coins and jewelry in order to keep a little scent of their ancestors with them? All these puzzle pieces, the optical crystal ball, early Damascus steel, astronomical knowledge, obsession with hydraulics and strange alloys. One or two might be a coincidence, but all of them appearing around one single lineage. No, that is a sign of inherited knowledge. They didn't invent them. They were trying to preserve them. They were the last librarians of a burning library. They knew too much. They possessed things not belonging to their time. And that very thing made them targets. Why did Pepin the Short and the Church want to wipe them out so badly? It wasn't just for the throne. Perhaps the Carolinians and the forces behind them feared what the Merovingians were holding. They feared the truth about the origins of humanity would be exposed. So, the final question, where did this bloodline go? After the last king had his hair cut and was thrown into a monastery, did they go extinct? Or did they pull off the most spectacular trick in history, disappearing to survive, changing names, and continuing to pull the strings of the world from the shadows? The answer lies in our genome and in the secret societies you still hear rumors about. The year 9600 BC, geologists call this the end of the Ice Age, catastrophic sea level rise. But for the citizens of Atlantis, it was doomsday. Close your eyes and imagine. Not the chaotic scenes like in the movie 2012. The Atlantan elite, the priests, scientists, royals. They didn't run in panic. They knew this was coming. They read the doom in the alignment of the stars and the tremors of the Earth's crust. They had prepared for Plan B. They didn't load the ships with gold and jewels. Gold can be dug up anywhere. They brought something much more precious, knowledge and genes. They brought crop seeds, tools, star maps, and most importantly, the most sacred royal bloodlines. When these refugees landed in Europe, who did they meet? Hunter-gatherer tribes living in caves, afraid of thunder and fire. Imagine the disparity. One side knows how to build pyramids and control irrigation. The other side is still grinding stones to make axes. What do you think the natives called them? Immigrants. No, they called the newcomers gods. This is the origin of the concept divine right of kings. Why did kings of old always claim to be sons of heaven, of divine lineage? Because maybe they were telling the truth. What did the surviving Atlanteans do to avoid being wiped out amidst this sea of primitive people? They couldn't wage war. They were too few. They chose to integrate to dominate. They married local chieftains. They birthed hybrid children. They taught agricultural and construction knowledge in exchange for reverence and protection. But they always kept an unwritten rule. Keep the core bloodline as pure as possible. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the precursor to the House of Moving, Marovke, Childrich, Clovis. They weren't barbarians who suddenly became smart. They were heirs. They were the holders of the torch in the medieval long night. Their bizarre practices, long hair, polygamy, healing abilities, obsession with water, and geometric symbols, none of it was superstition. These were fragments of a lost civilization, desperately preserved over thousands of years. But their tragedy was time. Time dilutes blood. Time distorts memory. The later generations of Merovingians, the lazy kings, perhaps acted only on instinct. They knew they were special, but they had forgotten why they were special. They knew hair must not be cut, but they forgot what that antenna was used for. And when they forgot, they weakened. Year 751 AD, Pepin the Shortcuts, Childeric III's hair. It wasn't just a coup. It was the severing of the final link to Atlantis on the public political stage. The Carolinians wanted to replace divine blood with the Church's mandate. They wanted to erase the truth that human civilization did not start in Rome or Jerusalem, but somewhere in the middle of the ocean. But, and this is a massive but, do you really think a lineage that existed for 10,000 years would let itself be exterminated that easily? History says the House of Moving died. I say they just went into hiding. They shifted from public kings to secret kings, secret societies, legends of the Holy Grail, Sangreal meaning royal blood, banking families manipulating Europe from the shadows. Could that be where the blood of Atlantis continues to flow? They no longer rule by the throne. They rule by knowledge, by finance, and by mystery. Imagine this. You are a member of a superior race. Your bloodline is directly descended from Poseidon and Clio. You possess technologies that humanity today might not even dream of yet. And then boom, the water rises. Everything sinks to the bottom of the ocean. But the most interesting question isn't how did Atlantis sink, but where did the survivors go? They didn't all die. Don't be that naive. The most elite families, those holding the genetic legacy, or to put it bluntly, those who believed their blood was cleaner than the blood of commoners, boarded ships. They scattered like seeds thrown into a storm, east, north, south. They knew they might never see each other again, but they had an ironclad belief bordering on madness. This bloodline must endure. So where did they drift to? Theories pop up like mushrooms. But let's look at this map. The eastern route, Mediterranean. Look at the Minoans on the island of Crete. Around 3500 BC, they suddenly appeared with complex palaces, modern drainage systems, and the linear script that we still scratch our heads over today. You think a bunch of Neolithic people trying to grow wheat suddenly woke up and knew how to build palaces? Or did someone tutor them? The northern route, Atlantic, France, Britain, Ireland, the giant stones of Stonehenge, Karnak. We are talking about structures requiring astronomical knowledge and superior engineering appearing abruptly around 4000 BC. People say prehistoric men made them through trial and error. Trial, you don't try stacking 50 on rocks. You have to know exactly what you are doing. That is inherited knowledge, not scavenged learning. The western route, the Americas. This is where mainstream archaeologists will scream in my face. But look, pyramids in Egypt and pyramids in Mexico. Identical symbols in two civilizations separated by an entire ocean. Coincidence? Or the footprints of Atlantean refugees planting seeds on both shores of the ocean? All right, you survived the Great Flood and washed up on the shores of savages. What now? If you stand up and scream, "Hey, I am a god from Atlantis," you will be stoned to death or enslaved. But if you integrate completely after just a few generations, your divine blood will dilute and disappear like a drop of salt in the ocean. This is where their genius and cruelty is revealed. They needed a survival strategy spanning millennia. Can you feel the weight of it? Elders sitting around a fire, debating how to make sure their great-great-grandchildren still remember who they are. They developed preservation methods, so sophisticated, they are chilling. It sounds like eugenics, and actually it is. Atlantean families didn't marry randomly. They chose mates from the local population extremely carefully. Not for love at first sight. Wake up. They looked for genetic compatibility, traits that could maintain the qualities of the Atlantean bloodline. They created a new aristocratic class, families with power, not because of politics, but because of lineage. They bred for survival, but still kept the different core inside. How do you teach nuclear physics to someone holding a stone axe? You turn it into religion. Knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, medicine, all hidden within rituals, symbols and myths. The Druid priests in Britain, the mystery schools in Egypt and Greece. They were all living hard drives storing data of the lost civilization. Commoners saw magic, but the initiated saw science. So, how do these lost children recognize each other after 100 or 1000 years? They don't have Facebook or DNA tests. They use signs. Pay close attention to this part, because this is where we start seeing the silhouette of the Merovingians. Physical signs, strange eye color, birthmarks of distinctive shapes, rare blood types, and especially the hair. Remember this detail, sacred hair. Later, the Merovingian kings never cut their hair. That wasn't hippie fashion style. That was an antenna, the identifying mark of the divine lineage. Symbols. Have you ever seen the image of the golden bee? Why a bee? When you see a golden bee on a tomb, it is a coded message sent across centuries. Here rests one carrying the blood of sunken kings. Language and geography. They kept names belonging to no known language. They chose to live in places reminiscent of home. River forks, islands. They were obsessed with water. The lands of the Merovingians were later filled with waterways. A faint copy of Atlantis in memory. Centuries passed, then millennia. The original refugees died long ago. Their descendants perhaps forgot what Atlantis looked like. Knowledge became ritual. Truth became legend. But blood does not forget. It still flowed silently, winding through the rise and fall of Roman empires, creeping into barbarian tribes. It waited for the time to rise again. And then, in the 5th century, AD, nearly 10,000 years after the Doomsday, a family emerged from the shadows of history. They ruled the land of Francia, modern-day France. They had long hair, they worshipped the bee, and they claimed to carry divine blood. People called them the Merovingian dynasty. But blood wasn't the only thing following them through 10,000 years. There was something else, much more dangerous, an underground network built to protect them. Do you think a bloodline can survive 10,000 years just on luck? Luck only helps you survive until tomorrow. To survive 10 millennia, you need a system, you need accomplices, secret vaults and agreements, signed in shadows where sunlight never touches. Welcome to the Merovingian network. This isn't just royal history. This is the blueprint of the greatest underground organization of the ancient world. Look at this event. Year 496 AD, King Clovis I of the Merovingians converts to Catholicism. History books will tell you, oh, that was a brilliant political move. Clovis needed the church's support, and the church needed a protecting sword. Sounds logical. But let me show you the gaping hole in this fairy tale. The Catholic Church of that time was not easygoing. They were ready to excommunicate, even burn alive those who deviated. Yet look at who the Merovingians were. They practiced polygamy. They refused to cut their hair because they believed divine power lay there, a ritual reeking of paganism. They claimed to have the ability to heal by hand like Jesus. They declared their blood was divine, needing no one to canonize them. Basically, they spat on every doctrine of Christianity. Clovis should have been thrown onto the pea, but no, Pope Anastasius II welcomed Clovis as a defender of the faith.
Why?
My hypothesis, the church knew. The highest officials of the early church, those holding ancient texts from Alexandria and Rome, they knew what the Merovingian bloodline was. They didn't convert Clovis to save his soul. They were executing a corporate merger. They wanted to bring the superior blood of Atlantis under their wing. A compromise. You keep your magic and your long hair as long as you kneel before the cross publicly. If blood is the software, they needed hardware to run it. The monasteries, the double-sided fortresses. Have you noticed that monasteries sponsored by Mayan royalty were often located on extremely specific sites? Places that were once pagan temples, places with strong magnetic fields, dragon veins, ley lines. These monasteries acted as a perfect cover. Upstairs, monks sang hymns. In the basement, they copied and stored ancient manuscripts on astronomy, sacred geometry, and Atlantean medicine. They were librarians of a lost civilization, camouflaged in brown robes. The satellite aristocracy. Surrounding the Merovingian king was a circle of strange noble families. They weren't just rich, they had private libraries when the whole world was illiterate. They built castles with defensive architecture ahead of their time. They were like loyal mastiffs or jailers. Their mission was to protect the main bloodline while breeding with each other to create a backup gene network. If the main line broke, the collateral line would take over, a biological backup plan. Don't think the Merovingians just stayed cooped up in France. Their network reached further than you think. The Silk Road of knowledge. Meve merchants traveled to Byzantium, the Middle East, and rumor has it even India. But they didn't just trade spices or silk. They traded news. They transported special passengers. They connected the remaining fragments of Atlantis across the world. A primitive internet running on horsepower and sails. The Islamic connection. This is where mainstream historians will frown. There is evidence of deep exchange between Merovingian families and Islamic scholars. Why? Because both were preserving the same ancient intellectual source. When Europe sank into the Dark Ages, the light of Atlantis might have been kept safe in the libraries of Baghdad or Cordoba, waiting for the day to be brought back to the West. That wasn't learning from the enemy. That was cooperation between those in the same boat. I know the Knights Templar appeared in 1119, nearly 400 years after the Merovingian dynasty collapsed, but look closely at their shadow. Legend says the first 9 knights dug beneath Solomon's temple in Jerusalem for 9 years. What did they find? Gold, number. They became rich too quickly for it to be just gold. Many theories suggest they found documents, papers proving the true origin of the Merovingian bloodline, or maps to Atlantean knowledge treasures. Maybe the Knights Templar were the reborn armed wing of the old Merovingian network. They used sacred geometry. They built the first banking system. They operated in secret. They were heirs returning to reclaim what was lost. Finally, don't make the mistake of patriarchal men of old. Don't ignore the women. In the world of the Merovingians, women held the keys. Queen Clilda, who converted Clovis, was she really a devout sheep? Or was she a handler, a controller, ensuring Clovis made the right chess moves needed to protect the bloodline? If Atlantis was a matriarchal society, as some legends suggest, then the women in the shadows were the guardians of the ultimate secrets. They passed down knowledge through lullabies, stories told by the fireplace, recessive genes lying dormant, waiting for the day to awaken. This network was perfect, wasn't it? The church, nobility, merchants, codes, an impregnable fortress. But history teaches us a bitter lesson. No empire is eternal. And when you hold a secret too big, you don't just attract worshippers, you attract the envious, the fearful. In the 8th century, a new force rose, an ambitious family of Mayas, the Carolingian family, and they didn't just want the throne. They wanted to completely wipe out the existence of the Merovingians. They didn't just kill people, they killed memory itself. The year 751 AD, a coup took place. But it wasn't a normal dynastic change. It was the largest collective brainwashing campaign in medieval Europe. The goal wasn't just to depose a king. The goal was to erase a species. Welcome to the fall of the Merovingians and the rise of the usurpers, the Carolingian family. Let's start with the most painful image, the last king, Childeric III. He wasn't beheaded immediately. His enemy, Pippin the Short, a name already full of repression and ambition, did something more cruel. He ordered the king's haircut. To you, it's just a new hairstyle. But to the Merovingians, it was spiritual castration. Recall part 1. The hair was the antenna, the cord connecting them to the divine origin, to Atlantis. As the scissors went snip, Pippin wasn't just cutting keratin. He was declaring to the world, look, your god is now just a pathetic bald guy. Other men in the lineage were hunted down. Some were killed. The rest were thrown into monasteries, forced to become monks, so they could never reproduce again. The message was crystal clear. This bloodline must die. You can't kill everyone, so you must kill their reputation. Pepe and his descendants, especially Charlemagne the Great, hired the most brilliant pens of the era to rewrite history. They created the concept fine, the lazy kings. Carolingian history books proclaimed that Moravian kings were useless, spending all day lying on ox carts and letting officials worry about state affairs. Sound familiar? That is a classic smear tactic. But think a little. If they were truly lazy and useless, why was Pippin so afraid of them? Why go to the trouble of erasing them so thoroughly? The truth is likely the opposite. The silence and distance of the Merovingian kings was not laziness. It was ritual. They were not administrative managers. They were priest kings. Their job was to maintain the spiritual balance of the kingdom, not count tax money. Pippin, a pragmatic mayor, twisted that sanctity into incompetence to legitimize his coup. This is the part that angers me the most. The destruction of knowledge. The royal archives gone. Entire genealogies, diplomatic correspondence, legal records of the Merovingians. Boom, evaporated. Why? Because they contained proof of Atlantan origins or ancient technological formulas. Edited chronicles. Carolingian monks took quills and scrapers, scraped away passages praising Mayans in old manuscripts, and wrote lies over them. Like medieval Photoshop, architecture, Merovingian palaces were smashed, their stones taken to build churches for the new dynasty. Even the graves were not left in peace. They dug up graves not just for gold. They wanted to take away the grave goods, the physical evidence connecting the dead to ancient ancestors. Symbols have their own power, and the Carolingians knew that. The Merovingian bee, symbol of collective connection, of hive mind, of resurrection, was totally banned. Instead, the new dynasty introduced more aggressive symbols, lions, eagles, symbols of earthly power, of domination by force. But here is an interesting detail, history's Easter egg. Over 1,000 years later, when Napoleon Bonaparte ascended to Emperor of France, he refused to use the flirtily of the Bourbon kings. What did he choose? The golden bee. Napoleon knew. He knew where the true power lay. He was trying to reconnect with the Merovingian legacy, skipping over 1,000 years of fake history in between. A cheeky wink sent to the past. Finally, the deepest cut came from the church. To legitimize Penn, who had no royal blood, the church had to change an entire theological system. Before king is by blood, divine. Now, king is by anointing approved by the Pope. Do you see the power shift? Before, the Merovingian king had intrinsic power. He was king because he was himself. The church could not strip him of his blood. But with the new rule, the church is the one holding the oil jar. The church makes kings, and the church can unmake kings. Pippin got the throne, but he sold the soul of the monarchy to the Vatican. From that moment, the concept of holy blood, holy grail/sangreal, was forced to retreat into the shadows. It became heresy. It became taboo. They thought they had won. Haircut, books burned, tombs destroyed, king dead. The Merovingian dynasty officially ended on paper. The world forgot Atlantis. The world forgot the sorcerer kings. We entered the era of warrior kings and powerful popes. But you cannot truly destroy a river. You can only block its flow, and it will find a way to go underground. That blood didn't disappear. It just changed its name. It hid in secret societies, branch families, holy grail legends. It waited. And the final question for us, where is that legacy now? Are the seeds sown 10,000 years ago still sprouting in our modern world? Do you believe in ghosts? I'm not talking about white sheets floating around scaring people in horror movies. I'm talking about the ghosts of history, forces declared dead, buried under tons of earth and legal texts, yet continuing to control the world from the shadows. The Merovingians lost the throne in 751. That is a fact. But their blood, it didn't evaporate, set. It did what water always does when meeting an obstacle. It flows to a deeper level. Welcome to the immortality of blood. After the great purge of the Carolean dynasty and the church, the guardians of the bloodline were forced to change tactics. They couldn't talk about Merovingian kings anymore. That name was a death sentence. They needed a code, a metaphor beautiful enough to be passed down, but mysterious enough to hide the truth. And so in the 12th century, right when the Knights Templar were at the peak of their power, stories about the Holy Grail began to flood Europe. You think the Holy Grail is a wooden cup Jesus drank from, or the cup catching his blood on the cross. Let's play a language game. In Old French, sangreal equals Holy Grail. But if you break the rhythm elsewhere, sangreal equals royal blood. The Holy Grail was never an object. It was a secret. It implied the blood of God, or in our hypothesis, the blood of Atlantis carried in the vessel, which is the womb of a woman passed from one generation to another. Throughout the Middle Ages, while clueless knights went looking for a cup to drink the water of eternal life, secret societies smirked. They knew the Holy Grail was still living, breathing, hiding under false names, protected by an invisible network. Look at the Gothic cathedrals, Notre Dame, Chartres, etc. They sprung up massively in the 12th century, right after the Knights Templar returned from Jerusalem. Historians say, oh, they just suddenly got good at building. Really? Before that, Europeans were living in dark, damp fortresses. Suddenly, they built soaring arches piercing the sky, complex stained glass windows using principles of gravity and light that modern engineers still respect. My hypothesis, that is not religious architecture, that is technology, that is the revival of sacred geometry, the legacy of Atlantis. The stonemasons' precursors to Freemasonry. Where did they get the blueprints? Perhaps from the secret archives the Merovingians and Templars protected. They hid knowledge right in front of everyone's eyes. Every church is a textbook in stone on mathematics and astronomy, camouflaged under a guise of piety to avoid church scrutiny. Back to the biological question, what happened to the deposed Merovingian families? They didn't all die. They married into other lineages. Noble families in Scotland like Sinclair, ducal families in France like the Guise or Lorraine lines, even infiltrating the bloodlines of later European royalty through strategic marriages, like dropping a drop of blue dye into a water tank. After 1,000 years, you no longer see the concentrated blue. The whole tank looks transparent, but the blue molecules are still there, dispersed everywhere, etc. Perhaps right now, your neighbor, or the CEO of that big tech corporation, or even you are carrying a segment of genetic code from Clio and Poseidon. Recessive traits still occasionally surface, a strange intuition, a dream about the ocean swallowing a city, or an innate mathematical talent requiring no study. We are living in the 21st century. We have iPhones, AI, and rockets to Mars. You think ancient secret societies are obsolete? Huge mistake. Look at how the world operates. Real power rarely lies with the people shouting on TV. Power lies in networks, international banks, elite clubs, family alliances that never appear in Forbes. Is it a coincidence that the symbol of the pyramid and the eye is on the US dollar bill? Is it a coincidence that Napoleon and later many modern organizations remained obsessed with symbols of Egypt and Atlantis? If the mission of the Merovingians was preserving knowledge and order through chaos, then look who is holding the knowledge: big data, who is trying to establish a new world order. Maybe the gatekeepers no longer wear white robes or carry swords. They wear suits, run investment funds, and they are still executing the old mission, guiding humanity or controlling humanity based on a blueprint from 10,000 years ago. Imagine this. You are a king. Not the kind of king who rides horses, swings swords, or shouts orders to soldiers, etc. You are a lazy king, Or at least that is what history textbooks want you to believe. You lie on an ox-drawn cart, your long hair flowing down to touch the ground, and the people believe that if you simply touch them, the sick will be cured and the crops will be bountiful. You are a living god. Then one fine day in the year 751 AD, your door bursts open, not to serve breakfast, but to strip you of everything. They don't kill you. Oh no, killing is too mundane and also too messy. They do something far more cruel. They cut your hair. Today, we will not talk about heroic battles. We will talk about the greatest, most sophisticated, and most brutal identity theft in European history. The fall of the Merovingian dynasty and the rise of the usurpers, named the Carolingians. But more importantly, we will peel back the layers to reveal why this bloodline terrified those in power so much that they had to wipe it from human memory. Childrich III, the last Merovingian king. When the scissors of the coup plotters touched his hair, they didn't just cut off dead protein strands. They severed the link between Europe and a past that the church wanted to bury forever. Look at this naked truth. Pippin the Short, a name that already sounds lacking in prestige, and his Carolian gang understood one thing very well. The rule of the Merovingians was not based on who had the larger army. It was based on something far more terrifying: blood. They suspected, perhaps even feared, that the blood flowing in the veins of those lazy kings carried an extraordinary origin, something more ancient than the Bible, something that could be traced back to Atlantis, the continent that sank to the bottom of the ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Do you see the problem here? If the king's power comes from genetics from an ancient superior race, then what right does the Roman Church have to bestow sovereignty? If the Merovingian bloodline actually existed before the stories of Genesis, then the entire power structure of Christianity and Western civilization would collapse like a sand castle before a tsunami. That is why they couldn't simply kill the king. They had to kill the idea of the king. They had to rewrite history, burn books, shave heads, turn divine kings into lazy clowns in the history books. The brainwashing campaign was a brilliant success. For a time, for centuries, you only knew the Merovingian as faint footnotes. But you know, truth is like water. You can build a dam to stop it, but it will always find a crack to leak through. And when it leaks, it will rot even the most solid foundations. In 751, when Childeric was thrown into a monastery, shaved bald like a criminal, the shock didn't stop within the four walls of the prison. It spread throughout the Frankish kingdom like a subterranean earthquake. On the surface, everything seemed fine. Pippin took the throne. The Pope gave his blessing, a perfect power transaction. The church needed an army. Pippin needed a crown. Contract signed. But beneath that glossy paint was extreme panic. The Frankish nobility, those who bowed to Pippin, were trembling inside. For 300 years, they believed that only Merovingian blood could sanctify the throne. That wasn't a law. It was a religious belief, a biological truth. Now, Pippin sat there. He could divide land. He could kill. But could Pippin heal the sick with a touch? Number. He was just an ambitious dwarf with a sharp sword. That psychological void was something no military victory could fill. And that was when the real purge began. You think Pippin would leave the old loyalists alone? Too naive. A silent, cold purge swept through the aristocracy, those who had married their daughters to the Merovingians. Those who had sworn to protect the sacred blood now found themselves facing the barrel of a gun, metaphorically, and sometimes literally. The message was clear: swear loyalty to the new dynasty or disappear. Lands were confiscated, titles were stripped. Families that once prided themselves on their connection to the divine now viewed it as a death sentence. But the nobility wasn't stupid. They were survivors. Some retreated to remote estates, bolted their doors, and pretended to be politically dead. Others, more reckless, fled across the border, seeking refuge in lands Pippin's hand hadn't reached yet. And most interestingly, the third group, those who went underground. Sons changed their names, burrowing into monasteries. Daughters quietly married unknown provincial nobles. The dragon's blood now hid in the guise of water snakes, waiting for its time. They didn't disappear. They were just playing hide and seek with history. And what about the church? Oh, our friends in black robes. They were the ones with the biggest headache. Imagine you are a bishop. All your life you preached that the Merovingian blood was sacred, was God's will. Then suddenly the Pope sends a letter saying, "Hey, change my mind. Pippin is the true love." Now this theological gymnastics was enough to make anyone dizzy. Monasteries once sponsored by the Merovingians fell into crisis. Which side to choose? Be loyal to the past and be wiped out, or bow to the present and live in shame? Many places chose a cunning compromise. On the surface, they hailed Pippin, but inside the underground crypts, beneath the cold stone floors, they secretly hid documents, artifacts, and fragments of the truth about a lost dynasty. These monasteries became the black boxes of history, waiting for the day to be decoded. The consequence of 751 wasn't just changing a name on the throne. It upturned the entire social order. Merchants lost business connections. Underground networks were severed. Sacred symbols like the bee and long hair were banned, replaced by safer, duller symbols. But the greatest tragedy wasn't political. If the Atlantis hypothesis is correct, then deposing the Merovingians was a spiritual catastrophe. We single-handedly severed the living link to humanity's most ancient roots. That blood, which should have been honored, was forced to flow in the shadows, fragmented and gradually forgotten. But my friends, darkness is where the most interesting things grow. When you bury a seed, you don't kill it. You give it a chance to germinate into something else, something mythical. The Merovingians died, but their ghost was just beginning a journey to haunt Europe for the next 1,000 years. So, what happened to that blood when it sank into the shadows? What legends did it transform into that we still hear told by the fire today? The Holy Grail, King Arthur, or secret societies manipulating the world. They often say, history is written by the victors. A cliché, isn't it? But do you know what's more interesting? It is. Myths are written by the losers. When the Carolingians took scissors to Childrich III's hair, they thought they had severed the Merovingian blood from history. They were wrong. A fatal mistake. They didn't wipe it out. They just pushed it underground. And in that damp darkness, the pressure of oppression turned coal into diamond. The political blood died, but the mythical blood was born. Let's talk about the price paid for the betrayal of 751. Before that, being king was due to genes. You were king because your blood was special. Period. No one argues with DNA. But when Pippin the Short made a deal with the Pope to usurp the throne, he inadvertently opened Pandora's box. He turned kingship from a biological destiny into a negotiable contract. If the Pope could make a king, then the Pope could depose a king. If military power decided who wore the crown, then the guy with the bigger sword would be king. The result, perpetual chaos. Do you think the War of the Roses in England or the bloody civil wars between European noble families were accidental? Number. They were all aftershocks of 751. When the sanctity of the blood was broken, the throne became an auction item. Europe spent the next 1,000 years slaughtering each other just to answer the question, who is the legitimate ruler? But let's put politics aside. Let's look at what was happening in the shadows. Southern France, the county of Rise, the place we later came to know by the mysterious name Rennes-l'Étau. While the court in Paris was busy rewriting history, down here, noble families were whispering other stories. They claimed to be descendants of the deposed bloodline. They didn't speak loudly. They didn't print newspapers. They guarded genealogies, secret documents in underground vaults, waiting. Is it a coincidence that this land was always a thorn in the side of the church and the French monarchy? Is it a coincidence that legends of hidden treasure of secrets that could shake the world always originate from here? If the Moravian blood carried the legacy of Atlantis, then Rhazes was its nuclear bunker. And then we have the Holy Grail. 12th and 13th centuries. Suddenly, stories about the Knights of the Round Table seeking the Holy Grail exploded all over Europe. A cup catching God's blood. A sacred stone fallen from Lucifer's crown. Or something more mundane but more dangerous. Let's play a word game. In Old French, sangrial means Holy Grail, but if you shift the letters a bit, sangrial, royal blood. Do you see the irony? When people couldn't speak of the Merovingian royal blood openly without being beheaded, they turned it into a fairy tale, a mystical object granting power to its owner, a secret guarded by chosen families. Stories about the Holy Grail weren't entertainment novels. They were time capsules containing repressed memories. They were codes. And the Grail isn't a cup. It is a lineage carrying within it the DNA of ancient gods. Human paranoia or hope didn't stop there. When reality, under the Carolingians, became too brutal, people began dreaming of a savior king in a faraway land. The legend of Prester John, priest King John, was born. a powerful Christian king in the East, possessing magic, a descendant of the three magi, holder of ancient secrets Europe had lost. Why did this legend appear right then? It was a psychological defense mechanism. If our king here is a fake, surely there must be a real king somewhere out there. Prester John was a projection of the nostalgia for the Merovingians, a king who was both priest, sorcerer, and ruler, a ghost of the past projected onto the map of unexplored lands. But the clearest evidence isn't in stories. It stands right before your eyes, towering in European cities, Gothic architecture, 12th century. Suddenly Europe broke away from the clumsy, dark, Romanesque style to build churches reaching straight for the sky, flooded with light, with engineering calculations far ahead of the times. Sandini, Chartres, Notre Dame. Where did they come from? Who taught them about sacred geometry? Who taught them to use the golden ratio? How to encode astronomical alignments into stone? Some say it was knowledge the Knights Templar brought back from Jerusalem. But remember, who were the original patrons of these techniques? Which regions were the cradle of Gothic? They were the very lands once loyal to the Merovingians. If the Merovingians truly held the legacy of Atlantis, a civilization master of architecture and energy, then Gothic wasn't a new invention. It was a revival. Construction secrets passed underground through mason guilds, through secret brotherhoods, finally found a way to the light, but under the guise of honoring the Christian God. Ironically, the Church's greatest cathedrals might have been built using the technology of those the Church wanted to destroy. But darkness always has a way to strike back. 13th century, southern France burned again. This time it wasn't haircuts, it was burning alive. The Albigensian crusade against the Cathars. Who were the Cathars? Heretics believing in dualism, or were they the last guardians of a dangerous secret? Look at the map. The territory of the Cathars overlaps perfectly with the old territory of the Merovingians. The Church slaughtered them with unprecedented brutality. Kill them all, God will know his own. Why such fear? Why burn every document, destroy every stronghold like Montagu? Rumor has it the Cathars held a treasure, but when soldiers took the fortress, the treasure had vanished. Perhaps that treasure wasn't gold. Perhaps it was documents proving the true origin of the sacred blood. Once again, history repeats itself. The Purge of 751 replayed in 1209. The enemy was the same. The victims were the same. Only the fire was hotter. So we have a panoramic picture, a deposed bloodline retreating into shadows, transforming into the Holy Grail legend, projected as Prester John, encoded into Gothic architecture and hunted under the name Cathar. It's like an ideological virus. The more you try to destroy it, the more powerfully it mutates. It crept into secret societies, into Freemasonry, into the Rosicrucian. It left traces everywhere, but only for those who know how to look. And the clearest, strangest trace lies in a tiny animal, a creature only 2 centimeters long, but carrying the secret of an entire lost civilization. Look at this tiny thing. In 1653, they found the tomb of Child I, the father of the Merovingian dynasty. And do you know what they found? Not piles of intimidating weapons, not the skulls of enemies. They found 300 bees, made of solid gold. 300 of them, identical. Let me ask you a question. If you were a warrior king, a barbarian conqueror, as history books describe, what mascot would you choose? A lion, an eagle, a wolf, things that are big, fierce, muscular, but an insect, a tiny 2-centimeter bee. Mainstream historians, the people I often call the lazy explanation squad, will shrug and say, oh, it's probably just decoration. Ancient Germans liked nature. Decoration. Dead wrong. In the world of power and mystery, nothing is just for decoration. These 300 bees were not jewelry. They were a manifesto. They were a code, and the key to decoding it lies deep at the bottom of the ocean where Atlantis sleeps. Rewind time. The bee is not a trivial creature. In ancient Egypt, the bee was the symbol of Lower Egypt, the tears of the god Ra, and more importantly, a symbol of resurrection. Ancients believed bees could be born from the carcass of a bull, life sprouting from death. Jump to Cree, the brilliant Minoan civilization. There, the bee goddess reigned supreme. Priestesses were called Malice. So why did a barbarian Frankish tribe in northern Europe revere the same symbol as these elite Mediterranean civilizations? Were they copying, or were they all Egypt, Minoan, and Merovingian inheriting a legacy from a common lost mother? A root civilization sunk into the sea, where the bee was the most sacred symbol. Look at the nature of bees through the eyes of an advanced civilization. Bees do not live in chaos. They live in a society of absolute order, obedient to a queen. It is the perfect model of divine monarchy. They create honey. Don't think of it just as a sweetener for tea. To the ancients, honey was an antibacterial substance, never spoiling. It was a symbol of immortality. And here is the most interesting part. Bees navigate by the position of the sun and the Earth's magnetic field. They are natural astronomers and bioengineers. If the Merovingian bloodline truly came from Atlantis, a society possessing superior technology and understanding of the universe, then what symbol is more perfect than the bee? It represents order, immortality, and harmony with the universe. When Childrich took 300 bees to his grave, he didn't take jewelry. He took his ancestral identity. He was telling the other side, I belong to the lineage of the builders. But bees are not the only sign. Look down at the water. The Merovingians were obsessed with water. Their churches, their ceremonial sites were always attached to holy wells, springs carefully lined with stone. You think they were just thirsty? Number. Remember Plato's description of Atlantis? How was that city structured? Concentric circles of land and water alternating. The holy wells of the Merovingians, with stone rings surrounding the water source, were not random designs. They were miniature models of the ancient capital. They were memorials to a lost homeland. Coincidence? In this trade of historical detective work, I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in encoded memory. And then we have the spiral, the Tricilian. 3 curving branches. It appears on weapons, on jewelry, on their manuscripts. The spiral is one of humanity's oldest symbols. Yes, but the way the Merovingians used it was special. The curves followed the golden ratio. They mimic the flow of water, the movement of galaxies, and the growth of life. It suggests a mathematical understanding that the Dark Ages were not supposed to have. Now, let's talk about the most famous symbol of France, the Fleur Day. The Church says it is a lily symbolizing the purity of the Virgin Mary, or the Holy Trinity. Sounds holy, but look closer. Strip away the Christian coating. Look at that shape. The central petal stands straight. 2 side petals curve outward. Is that really a flower, or is it a stylized bee? Body in the center, wings on the sides, or is it the image of a crashing wave or a 3-pronged spear of Poseidon, the sea god of Atlantis? The fleur dies is a master of camouflage. It is a polyvalent symbol. To the pagan, it is a beautiful flower. To the Church, it is the Trinity. But to those who know, those holding the secret of the bloodline, it is a reminder of the true origin. The bee didn't disappear. It just changed its shape to survive right under the enemy's nose. And finally, the most undeniable proof, mathematics. Folks, you can't build great structures on blind faith. You need math. You need geometry. The churches built under the patronage of this bloodline contain incredible ratios. Square of 2, square of 3, the golden ratio, orientation to constellations with minute, perfect precision. History tells us this knowledge was lost after Rome fell and only rediscovered later. Wrong. This knowledge was never lost. It was kept. It was kept by the Masons, the secret societies, those serving the Merovingian bloodline, rams, charts. These places aren't just God's churches. They are textbooks in stone on sacred geometry. The science of the Atlanteans' golden bees, holy water wells, mathematical spirals, all point in one direction, that the Merovingians were not just a ruling dynasty. They were the librarians of humanity. They held the fragments of a dead civilization. And when they were deposed, when Childeric was shaved, what was threatened wasn't just the throne. What was threatened was knowledge. And when knowledge is forced into the shadows, it becomes more dangerous than ever, because what you bury will one day rise from the grave. The year 751, a pair of scissors, an imprisoned king. End of story. No, that was just the beginning of a nightmare lasting millennia. When Pippin, the Short, and the Church broke the rule king by divine decree to replace it with king by political agreement, they accidentally pulled the pin on a grenade and threw it into the heart of Europe. Look at the consequences. If blood is no longer the sole deciding factor, then anyone can be king if they are strong enough and devious enough. The War of the Roses in England, the 100 Years' War, civil wars tearing apart the old continent, all stemmed from that core insecurity. Is the guy sitting on the throne the real deal? This paranoia created a strange obsession. Later kings, whether Valois, Bourbon, or Habsburg, All desperately tried to mimic the magic of the Merovingians. They organized rituals to touch and cure scrofula, king's evil. Imagine the scene. A 17th-century French king doused it in perfume to mask the stench, trying to touch ulcerated peasants to prove he had miracles. It was like a guy wearing a fake Rolex trying to convince everyone he's a billionaire. They had the throne, they had the army, but they lacked one thing: biological authentication. But the real blood, where did it go? It flowed into the pages of books, it flowed into art, it turned into ink. When you cannot hold a sword, you hold a pen. Stories about King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, the Holy Grail. They weren't fairy tales for children. They were exiled history. Set. The Holy Grail, San Grail, or Sang Royal, royal blood. The entire genre of medieval romantic literature was essentially an underground PR campaign for the lost dynasty. It injected into human minds the idea that the true king is hiding, guarding a sacred secret, and one day he will return. And that blood had such vitality that even the greatest conquerors couldn't ignore it. Look at Napoleon Bonaparte. When he ascended to emperor, he wanted to distance himself from the weak Bourbon kings before him. He wanted to connect directly with a power more ancient, more sacred. What symbol did Napoleon choose to embroider on his coronation robe? The lily? No, he chose the bee. Napoleon had golden bees attached to his red velvet robe. He was sending a signal to those who understood the matter that he was restoring the legacy of Child and the Merovingians, that he was continuing the flow of Atlantis, skipping over 1,000 years of fake history of the church and usurper dynasties. An outsider, a military genius, bowing to the symbol of a tiny insect. You think that's a coincidence? We have come a long way. From Atlantis sunk at the bottom of the sea, to powerful long-haired kings, to the cruel scissors of 751 and the echoes in secret societies today. The final question is all of this real? Set. Did the Merovingians really carry Atlantean genes, or is it just collective paranoia, a way for humanity to romanticize the past? Actually, the answer isn't as important as its impact. Whether real or fake, the idea of a sacred bloodline, of a stolen noble origin, has shaped Western history. It created crusades, built cathedrals, wrote epics, and fed the conspiracy theories running the underworld. Perhaps Atlantis never fully sank. It is still there, hidden in the genes of some people, hidden in the architecture of cities, hidden in the symbols we see every day without understanding. Look at the numbers. You know, mainstream historians usually hate coincidence, but they ignore it when it appears too obviously. For the Merovingians, the number 7 wasn't just a counting number. It was an obsession. We have 7 generations from Merovac to Childrich III. 7 royal centers, 7 sacred streams in the founding legend. Why 7? Were the chroniclers of that time too lazy? So they just copied, pasted this number everywhere? I don't think so. The number 7 is the rhythm of the universe. 7 classical planets, visible to the naked eye. 7 days in a week. In occult circles, 7 is the bridge between the mundane and the divine. Arranging history according to this number wasn't accidental. It was an attempt to hack into the structure of reality. The Merovingians didn't just rule land. They were trying to synchronize their sovereignty with the breathing of the stars. Or they were leaving behind a guide map that we've been too stupid to realize for the past 1,000 years. But if the number 7 makes you feel a bit abstract, let's talk about something more tangible: hair. While other kings cut their hair neatly in the Roman style to look civilized, the Merovingian kings kept their hair long. And I'm not talking about romantic hippie hairstyles. I'm talking about an absolute taboo law: never ever cut. From birth until death, their hair grew continuously. History calls them Res Ciaraniti, the long-haired kings. Why fashion? Number. Think like an electronic engineer for a second. Many ancient traditions believe hair is an extension of the nervous system. Imagine hair like antennas receiving low-frequency signals from the surrounding environment or even from other dimensions. But let's go a bit further into the crazy zone that I like. If the legacy of Atlantis truly flows in their veins, a hypothesis we will dissect later, then keeping hair uncut might be a biological necessity. Some esoteric schools teach that hair contains cellular memory. Cutting hair means severing the connection to ancestral knowledge. Just like pulling the internet cable, you become an offline computer, powerful but isolated. For the Merovingians, hair was the physical manifestation of accumulated power. It wasn't decoration. It was an external hard drive storing the royal bloodlines data, and their enemies knew this. Remember this detail well. When wanting to depose a Merovingian king, they didn't kill him immediately. They shaved his head. They formatted his hard drive. Now look at what they left behind. Jewelry, weapons, treasures. What do you see? Gold and red. Always gold and red. Set. Sometimes a bit of green, but gold-red is dominant. Of course, you might say, Zorro, don't all kings like gold? Yes, but this nuance is very strange. Gold represents the sun, indestructibility. Red is blood, is vitality. But this combination in children's artifacts recalls another legendary metal, oracle. In Plato's records of Atlantis, oracle was the second most precious metal only after gold, emitting a brilliant red light like fire. Look closely at the Merovingian items inlaid with red garnet stones on a gold background. Were they trying to recreate the colors of their lost homeland? Or did they actually possess the metallurgical formula to create an alloy carrying a specific energy frequency? It isn't aesthetics, it is technology. Technology camouflaged as art. And finally, look at their symbolic zoo. This is where things start to get messy and interesting. What do we see? Bulls, horses, fish, and especially the bee. Why these animals? Bull, direct connection to Minoan culture, on Cree to sacrifice and divine strength of the ancient Mediterranean. Horse, whose mount is this? Poseidon, the god of the sea. And don't forget, Poseidon is also the one said to have founded Atlantis. Fish, lazy scholars will say, oh, that's the symbol of Jesus. But the fish has been a symbol of souls swimming in the waters of existence long before Christianity appeared. Set. The bee Napoleon Bonaparte later became so obsessed with the Merovingian bee symbol that he took it as his emblem. The bee represents organization, honey, wisdom, and resurrection. Do you see the pattern here? Each of these animals doesn't stand alone. They are links. The bee relates to gold. Gold relates to water. Water relates to the spiral. The spiral relates to the bloodline. This is a language, folks, a cipher system. They didn't write their secrets on paper for anyone to read. They carved it into jewelry and it into legends and nurtured it within their own bodies. In the shadowy areas between these symbols, the true meaning weighs like treasures lying on the deep ocean floor. The Merovingians are trying to tell us something, that they didn't belong to that era, that they were survivors drifting from a more brilliant, more ancient civilization. But if they held such powerful secrets, why did they disappear? Or rather, why were they wiped out? 20th century. A bomb exploded in the historical research community. A book dared to question everything. And that was when Pandora's box was opened. But the story of holy blood of world-shaking conspiracy theories and why the Vatican breaks into a cold sweat hearing the name Merovingian. That is a story for the next part. Keep a cool head because we are only scratching the surface of this tomb. Set. In the previous part, we saw the Merovingians weren't normal barbarians. They lived by cosmic rules. They braided their hair like antennas, and they were obsessed with the colors of Atlantis. But for 1,000 years, they were just a faint footnote in history books. Then the 20th century arrived, and boom, that footnote turned into a media monster. What happened? Did historians suddenly get smarter? Something was excavated, something so dangerous it forced millions of people to rethink the foundations of Western civilization. Hold tight to your crucifix. We are entering the land of the greatest conspiracy theories of all time. Until the 1950s, research on the Merovingian was reserved for old professors in dusty libraries in France. But in 1982, 3 researchers, Begant, Lay, and Lincoln, threw a cultural nuclear bomb into everyone's living room. The book was called The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. Their thesis, insane, but incredibly seductive. They argued that the Merovingians were not descendants of Atlantean sea kings. Oh no. That would be too mild. They proposed that the blood flowing in the veins of the long-haired kings was the blood of Jesus Christ. According to this theory, Jesus did not die on the cross, or at least his lineage continued through Mary Magdalene, fled to southern France, and married into Frankish royalty. Sangreal, Holy Grail, wasn't the cup, said. It was Sangral, royal blood. The world went crazy. The Vatican panicked. Mainstream historians had heart attacks. But hear me out. However attractive this theory is, it could be a perfect smokescreen. Focusing on Jesus is a great way to distract from older, deeper mysteries. The connection to Atlantis, while less religiously shocking but historically earth-shattering, was pushed to the background. Why would they want us to look towards Jerusalem instead of looking out to the Atlantic Ocean. Every great conspiracy theory needs a real location, and for the modern Merovingian mystery, it is the tiny village of Rennes-l'Étang in southern France. The story starts like a cheap detective movie. In the 1890s, a priest named Bonga Saunier arrived to take over the parish. The church was in ruins, and he was dirt poor. Then one day, while repairing the altar, he allegedly found something. Legend says they were parchments hidden in a hollow pillar. Immediately after, the poor priest suddenly spent money like water. Saunier didn't just fix the church, he turned it into a bizarre theme park. He built a tower named Magdala, recalling Mary Magdalene, built lavish gardens, and hosted elite guests from all over Europe. What did he find? Merovingian gold treasure, documents proving Jesus' bloodline, or evidence of Atlantan technology. Saunier took the secret to his grave in 1917, but the sudden wealth and the strange symbols he left in his church, including a statue of a devil at the entrance, scream, "I know a truth you dare not face." 21st century. We no longer rely on rumors. We have technology. Modern archaeologists have brought their toys to Merovingian sites. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed hidden rooms beneath old churches and palaces. Chemical analysis shows their trade network was vast, larger than we thought. But here is the problem with science. It provides data, not necessarily answers. You find a hidden room, great. But who built it, and for what? They traded with the East, good. But what goods were they exchanging that was so important they had to be kept secret? Science is illuminating the details, but the big picture remains obscured. Sometimes new data even makes everything more confusing. And this is where things get really interesting. This is the hardest evidence we have. The thing making mainstream historians scratch their heads. DNA. When analyzing remains from Merovingian burial sites, geneticists expected to see typical Germanic or Celtic DNA profiles. After all, they were supposed to be barbarian tribes from the north, right? Dead wrong. The results showed unexpected diversity. Some key individuals carried genetic markers more common in the Mediterranean or Middle East than in Northern Europe. How does orthodoxy explain it? Oh, Europe back then was very multi-ethnic. Zorro says, bullshit, these patterns are not random. They suggest that certain lineage families maintained their distinct genetic profiles over generations amidst a sea of native Europeans. What were they preserving? Is this proof of Jesus' bloodline migrating from the Middle East? Or is it the genetic trace of survivors from an ancient Mediterranean maritime civilization? Those whom Plato called Atlantans, trying to keep their blood from being diluted. Science has proven they were outsiders. History proves they possessed timeless knowledge, and their fall proves they were a threat. But in the modern world, truth is no longer as important as the story. And at the beginning of the 21st century, a novelist turned this story into a billion-dollar industry, simultaneously drowning the truth under tons of fiction. You see, the Merovingian secret slept peacefully in the dark for centuries. But when the spotlight hit it, it didn't make the truth any clearer. It turned everything into a circus. And amidst the noise of the clowns, the real clues are being buried once again. The year 2003, a guy named Dan Brown publishes the book The Da Vinci Code, and the world goes crazy. Suddenly, your neighbor lady is discussing the bloodline of Jesus. Office workers argue about the Merovingians during their lunch break. The book was a fantastic detective story from the bloodline hypothesis. But here is the problem. It is fiction. Dan Brown did a great thing. He made millions of ordinary people start questioning mainstream history. He planted the idea in their heads that what you were taught in school might be a lie. However, what was the price? History was distorted. Facts were bent to serve a sensational plot. The Merovingians, from mysterious kings holding ancient technology, were reduced to pawns on a religious chessboard. And worse, it created a perfect shield for those who want to hide the truth. Now, anyone talking about the Merovingians or Atlantis is labeled a fiction fanatic. And from fiction, we step into the world of professional con artists. The internet era exploded. Online forums popped up like mushrooms. People shared data, compared notes. Great, right? Not really, because this is also the playground of fabricators. Let's talk about the Priory of Sion, a secret society allegedly protecting the Merovingian bloodline for centuries. Sounds cool, but the reality, it was the work of a Frenchman named Pierre Plantard in the 1950s. The ancient documents proving this society's existence. Fakes. Sophisticated forgeries, but still fakes. But the interesting question here isn't why did he fake it? The question is, why did millions of people desperate to believe in it? There is a deep psychological need within us. We loathe the chaos of the present. We want to believe there is a hidden order, a sacred bloodline silently guiding humanity. Hoaxes like the prairie of science succeed because they fill that spiritual void. But be careful. Amidst the garbage of wild conspiracy theories, the real gems are easily thrown away. When you are busy chasing a fake secret society, you forget to look at the Merovingian superior hydraulic engineering, which is real and inexplicable. So where are the serious historians in this mess? They are hiding under the table. When the Merovingian topic became attached to Jesus, Atlantis, and Dan Brown, mainstream scholars did what they do best: deny everything. They admit this dynasty is poorly understood, but they refuse to touch the sensitive parts. They ignore questions about the Merovingians' metallurgical knowledge. They ignore the architectural capabilities of these barbarians that surpassed their era. They ignore unique cultural practices that resembled neither Roman nor Germanic. Why? Fear of losing credibility. Fear of being called crazy. This is the tragedy of modern science. Legitimate historical mysteries, like how a warrior tribe held complex astronomical knowledge, have been overshadowed by bestellers. The truth is squeezed between two pincers. The wild fabrications of the crowd on one side and the arrogant silence of academia on the other. But there is one thing that doesn't care about human opinion. That is nature. Climate change and rising sea levels are bringing a new urgency to the Atlantis story. As scientists model ancient coastlines at the end of the Ice Age, Plato's account suddenly sounds less like a fairy tale. Lands were actually submerged. Civilizations could truly have been wiped out. If the Merovingians were survivors washing up on European shores, carrying fragments of lost knowledge, then their story isn't magic, it is climate history. And then we return to the final hope: DNA. Many hope genetic testing will be the holy grail that proves everything. But reality is much harsher. We have too few intact Merovingian bone samples, and over 1,500 years, the blood has been diluted. Even if I find a man in Paris today whose DNA matches Childeric I, what does that prove? Lineage does not prove supernatural power. It does not prove his ancestors came from Atlantis. It only proves that he is related to a dead king. Science has its limits. It can tell us who, but rarely tells us why and how. So, where do we stand? We have legends distorted by Hollywood. We have evidence ignored by academia. And we have a rising ocean threatening to swallow the final clues. But there is a question, a final question that no one has dared to answer satisfactorily. If their empire collapsed, where is their treasure? If they truly carried Atlantean knowledge, does it still exist today? Or are we just chasing ghosts? The year 751 AD, the Merovingian dynasty collapsed. The last king, Childeric III, was deposed, shaved, and thrown into a monastery. But the question that keeps me awake isn't about politics. It's about economics. 300 years of rule, 300 years of accumulation, gold, gems, and more importantly, artifacts containing their technology and knowledge. Where did it all go? When the Carolians took power with the enthusiastic help of the Pope, they certainly raided the treasury. That is the rule of the victor. The winner takes the crown, the loser loses the wallet. But think a little harder. If the Merovingians truly possessed artifacts connecting them to Atlantis, ancient star maps, glowing oracle objects, documents recording pre-deluge history, would they be stupid enough to leave them in the living room for the enemy to take? Child's tomb, found in 1653, was full of treasure, but he was just one king. What about Clovis? What about Dagobah? The tombs of the greatest kings have never been found. Either they were looted clean ages ago, or they are lying right beneath our feet. Maybe they are buried under the foundations of France's oldest churches, protected by curses and architectural traps. Or maybe the last loyalists took them away, burying them in secret locations, known only to those holding the key. The Carolinians might have seized the throne, but I bet they never found the black box of the old dynasty. Now look at this tattered family tree. European nobility is obsessed with origins. They can rattle off the name of their distant aunt's great-grandfather. But with the Merovingians, the further back you go, the blurrier it gets. Who was Merovac's father? Legend says his mother met a creature called a Kinotaur while swimming, a sea monster, half beast, half fish. Historians smirk. Oh,
just a fairy tale.
But as a skeptic, I see this as a deliberate cover-up. Could Kinator be a metaphor for someone from the sea, a survivor from a lost maritime civilization? Or is it how the ancients described a diver in a strange protective suit emerging from a submarine? Why do bloodline records become vague at the exact most crucial moment? It's like someone intentionally deleted the server data if they knew their origin was too different, too Atlantean or too non-human. Then staying silent about ancestors was the only safety measure to survive in a Europe increasingly controlled by religious dogma. People called them sorcerer kings. People said they could heal by laying on hands, royal touch. People said they had the gift of prophecy and clairvoyance. Modern history dismisses this as superstition or political tricks. But what if we look through Clarke's lens? Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. How did they know about complex irrigation techniques to reclaim land far beyond the level of that time? How did they master astronomy to build star-oriented structures? What if the Atlantean legacy wasn't gold and silver, but biological data? What if the ability to heal wasn't a miracle from God, but the activation of a type of bioenergy that ordinary people had forgotten how to use? The lazy kings Roaz Fine mocked for not participating in politics. Maybe they weren't lazy. They were meditating. They were keeping their vibrational frequency stable to maintain connection with the grid. We end at the darkest moment, year 751, when Childic III was pinned down and his sacred hair cut, stripping him of his divine power. What does history record? Silence. No one recorded what he said. No one described if he cried or cursed. Only the naked event. This silence isn't accidental. It is a black hole. The Carolinians performed a cultural cleansing. They burned books, smashed monuments, and rewrote history to turn the Merovingians into incompetents. But that brutal suppression itself is the clearest proof that they were afraid. You don't try to wipe someone from human memory unless their existence threatens the foundation of your reality. So, what does all this mean to you, sitting in front of the screen in 2024? Maybe Atlantis sank. Maybe the Merovingians died. But blood has memory. If the bloodline theory is true, then their descendants are still out there. Maybe they don't know who they are. Maybe you are carrying a dormant genetic code from a lost civilization, waiting for a signal to awaken. We are obsessed with this mystery, not because we are curious, but because deep down we feel humanity has lost something incredibly important, an ancient wisdom, an ability to connect with the universe that we traded for smartphones and fast food. History is not the past. History is a warning. If the Merovingians were the guardians of Atlantis' legacy, and they failed, then now, who will guard our legacy? Blood. This smelly and troublesome fluid is actually the most durable hard drive in human history. Have you ever wondered, while we are busy taking selfies and posting stories on social media, what the billions of double helixes in your body are whispering? They aren't talking about your lunch. They are retelling the story of 10,000 years ago. Let's pause a bit and reflect with the cool head of a skeptic. Suppose, just suppose, we could prove that the Merovingian lineage is truly the lost descendants of Atlantis. So, what does it turn them into X-Men? Does it help them shoot lasers from their eyes or fly like Superman? Sorry to disappoint you. If the naked truth were exposed, it might change nothing biologically. You are still human. You still feel pain. You still bleed. But it would result in a painful slap in the face of mainstream history. It confirms that our human origins are much stranger than what textbooks teach you. That the past is a bottomless pit whose bottom we have never truly seen. There is an irony, a type of cosmic dark humor that I really like. That is the true meaning of legacy. We often think legacy is power, is treasure, is the throne. But what if the real lesson from Atlantis, carefully packaged in the Merovingian genome, isn't about superiority, but about humility? Think about it. Atlantis, a peak civilization, superior technology, then boom, vanished overnight. The lesson here isn't look how great we are, but look how easily everything can be wiped out. That legacy teaches civilizations rise and fall like dominoes. Power is poison. Knowledge, no matter how brilliant, can be lost forever in a geological blink of an eye. The thing that survives the catastrophe isn't the strongest, but the one who knows how to keep secrets the most carefully. The Merovingians, with their bizarre customs, uncut long hair, and obsessive love for symbols, were perhaps not arrogant rulers. They were librarians, desperately protecting the last book remaining after the fire. They didn't teach their descendants pride in divine ancestors. They taught fear of the world's fragility. In the silence of history, the Merovingian mystery moves like underground rivers. You see, an underground river never disappears, it just hides. Sometimes it rises to the surface, glittering under the sun for a moment. That was the reign of Clovis of Dagobert, then dives deep into the rock when enemies arrive. The truth never appears intact like a hot pizza placed in front of you. It appears in fragments, in symbols meaningless to the profane, but code to the insider, in persistent questions that the Church and Carolinian historians tried to silence with swords and ink, but which refused to die. The echo of Atlantis is still ringing in the ruined halls of the Merovingians. If you are willing to be silent, turn off the noisy TV, put down the phone, and listen carefully in the stillness. You might hear it, the sound of waves crashing against the rocky shores of a lost continent. We have walked together through those glittering halls, huddled in the dark rooms of Francia, witnessed bloody purges. But this journey isn't over, set. Or perhaps it is just pausing to wait for a new player to join. So where do we stand now? I have led you through the glittering, though now flooded halls of Atlantis. I have dragged you through the dark dungeons of the Merovingian dynasty. But this is the moment I must ask you a serious question. Are you going to sit there watching this video like a sleeping pill, or are you going to do something with what you just heard? My journey ends here in a sense, but for you, it is just beginning. This is when your comfortable armchair turns into the hot seat. I am handing you a ticket to become a seeker. Sounds fancy, right? But believe me, being a seeker in this world is like driving against traffic on the highway. What does it mean to be a seeker? It means you must approach history with morbid curiosity instead of blind certainty. When the history professor says A is A, you must ask yourself, why isn't it B or X? It means cracking your head wide open to accept possibilities that textbooks usually throw in the trash bin with the label myth or superstition. Next time you walk into a museum, don't look at those artifacts as dead rocks or pieces of metal. Look at them as suicide notes. Those brooches, those swords, those broken bowls. They aren't decorations. They are encoded messages, SOS signals from ancestors trying to scream across the silent abyss of time. They are talking to you, but do you know how to decode them? Or are you just busy reading the placard written by some modern museum manager? Take Plato, for example. School teaches you he was a great philosopher who liked telling allegories. That Atlantis was just a fictional moral example to teach humans a lesson. But what if Plato wasn't the J.K. Rowling of ancient times? What if we read Plato like reading the field report of an investigative journalist, someone trying to preserve information passed down from Egyptian priests, the ones holding the library for all humanity when Greece was still herding goats? A seeker doesn't need to believe blindly that Atlantis and the Merovingians are distant cousins. You don't need to be a fanatic. You just need to be an unbiased detective. Maybe your investigation will prove me wrong. Maybe the Merovingians were just Germanic kings who liked showing off with long hair and some golden bees. Period. If that's the result, that's fine too. At least you found the truth with your own eyes, not by nodding furiously at what others spoon-fed you. But what if you find something else? What if these coincidences are too precise to be accidental? What if the silence of history is not due to forgetting but intentional concealment? Why were powerful institutions from Carolian Myers to the Church so desperate to extinguish this bloodline? What did they fear in that DNA strand? The truth often hides in the things they forbid you to mention. And now, if you are ready to be my accomplice in this case, prepare your tools. Next part, we won't talk theory anymore. We will practice. All right, amateur detectives. Time to leave the keyboard and get your hands dirty a little. You want to find the truth? Don't expect Google to serve it on a platter for you. Google only shows you what the algorithm wants you to see. To touch the marrow of the Merovingian and Atlantis mystery, you need a more practical toolkit and sometimes weirder. Step 1. Go treasure hunting. Literally. Don't just breeze through museums like bored tourists looking for a toilet. Find places holding Merovingian ruins. Stand before those artifacts. Look at children's golden bees. Why bees? Childrich, a powerful king, when entering the realm of death, did not choose to take lions, eagles, or dragons, symbols reeking of the testosterone of power. He took 300 insects, 3,000. Why? Bees don't just make honey. In the ancient world, bees were messengers between worlds. They were symbols of resurrection, of a collective intelligence, hive mind, and of immortality. When Napoleon wanted to assert his absolute power, that genius dwarf threw away the fleur-de-lis and chose these very bees to embroider on his coronation robe. He knew something we don't stare at them until you feel a shiver. Ask yourself, where are these 300 bees escorting the king's soul to? To God's heaven or to a giant hive sunk deep at the bottom of the ocean? Step 2. Look in the mirror, or, more accurately, look at your blood. What do you know about your great-grandfather or your ancestor 10 generations ago? Most of us are clueless, but your blood remembers. It is a tape recording that is never erased. Many European families, and through colonial spread, or to put it bluntly, invasion, many people around the world carry genetic codes from the Middle Ages. Maybe you, yes, I'm talking to you, sitting there with coffee in hand, are carrying the Merovingian source code. Modern genetic tests, DNA tests, have their limits. They are mostly used to sell ads or help you find out how likely you are to go bald. But if you know how to read them, they can reveal unexpected migration routes. Don't just look for surnames, look for traces. Is the Merovingian legacy sleeping in your veins, unrecognized, like a sleeper agent waiting for an activation signal? Step 3. Relearn geography, but this time bring a life jacket. Study oceanography. Look at the places where sea levels swallowed land after the Ice Age ended around 9600 BC. Does that date sound familiar? That is exactly when Plato said Atlantis was submerged. This isn't magic. This is melting ice. A massive amount of water pouring into the sea, drowning fertile coastal plains, places any intelligent civilization would choose to build cities. We aren't looking for a city floating in the sky. We are looking for prime real estate that got flooded. And finally, the hardest step, the step your rational, logical heads will want to deny. Inner work. I'm not telling you to become a monk or an incense addict, but to decode a mystery built on symbols and spirituality. You can't just use a ruler and calculator. You need intuition. Try an experiment. Turn off all lights, sit in silence, and ask yourself, what does it feel like to carry the memory of a drowned civilization? Meditate, or simply contemplate deeply on the symbols, the bee, the spiral, the concentric circles. Don't analyze them. Let them talk to your primitive brain. Maybe this knowledge doesn't come from reading books. It comes from resonance, like when you pluck a guitar string and the string next to it vibrates on its own. Maybe something inside you, an ancient gene code, a genetic memory, is waiting for the right vibrational frequency to wake up. A true seeker understands that logic is a great tool for building a house, but intuition is what helps you find the exit when that house collapses on your head. Do you dare to believe in the possibility that you already know the answer? That you don't need to learn, you just need to remember. But be careful. When you look deep into the abyss of memory, sometimes the abyss starts looking back at you, and what it reveals might not be what you expect. Do you hear that? That isn't just water hitting rock. That is the gnashing of teeth of history. That is the sound of oblivion trying to swallow what remains. We have reached the end of the road, or at least the edge of the cliff. Night is falling. And this is the moment we must face the cruelest question. What truly survives when the empire falls, when the strongest fortress walls turn to dust, when language dies and no one knows how to pronounce the names of great kings anymore? What remains? Stone survives. Silent megaliths still stand there like mute witnesses for builders who vanished into nothingness. Water survives. The ocean that swallowed Atlantis is still churning right beneath my feet. Indifferent and cruel symbols survive. Spirals, golden bees. They creep through cultures, immune to the erosion of time like persistent viruses. But the scariest, and also most magical thing is blood. Blood is a strange fluid. It evaporates quickly when spilled, but is more durable than any metal when inside. Your genetic code stores information with incredible fidelity, more honest than any historian ever paid to rewrite the past. Let's do a little math. From 9600 BC, the doomsday of Atlantis, to 751 AD, the doomsday of the Merovingian dynasty. That is over 10,000 years, about 400 generations, for a message, a gene line, or a secret to survive that span of time. You cannot rely on luck. You cannot just hope your descendants will remember. It requires strategy, intentionality, and brutal sacrifice. The Merovingians played a long game we can hardly imagine. They endured 300 years of tangible power, brilliant and loud. But when the board was flipped, they didn't die. They did what the wisest always do, retreated into the shadows. Survival in secrecy is stronger than existence in the light. The Carolinians might have burned books, smashed monuments, and cut the hair of the last kings to humiliate them, but they couldn't filter blood. They couldn't destroy the software installed in the genes. Think about the sacred hair, a physical manifestation of power. Enemies can cut it off, laugh at it, but the hair root is still there, and hair always grows back. Those carrying that blood scattered. They took their uncut hair to remote areas where the scissors of the new dynasty couldn't reach. Somewhere, perhaps right now, an unknown descendant is still maintaining a tradition they themselves don't understand why. And think about water. Always water. Atlantis sank beneath waves. The Kinotaur beast rose from the sea. The Merovingian hydraulic engineering ahead of its time. What is the ocean if not the giant external hard drive of this planet? Everything that ever existed dissolves into water, and water remembers all. Now night has enveloped us, and I must pass this torch to you. You have patiently listened to me ramble about kings, sea monsters, and lost continents. Why? Why are you still here? Maybe because deep down you feel mainstream history is too bland. It lacks something. A chilling but seductive truth. By watching this video, by letting these crazy ideas invade your mind, you have become part of the continuity. You are the newest link in the chain, protecting the mystery. Becoming a seeker doesn't mean you will find Atlantis tomorrow. It means you accept living with questions that have no definitive answers. Maybe Atlantis is real. Maybe the Merovingians were refugees carrying superior wisdom. Or maybe it is all just a grand allegory to teach us about humility, that even the most brilliant civilizations can be wiped out if arrogant. Whatever the truth is, this search has already changed how you view the world. Look at the gaps in history books. Listen to the silence between the lines. The truth lies not in what is written. The truth lies in what was erased. Sleep well, seeker. Dream of towers sunk underwater and sacred kings. And when you wake up tomorrow morning, don't look at the world with old eyes anymore. Look at it as a crime scene waiting to be decoded, because the golden bees are still waiting in the dark, and the blood never forgets. I am Zorro, and this is Dark History. My search pauses here, but yours is just beginning.